Underneath that table over there, the tablecloth?
George.
No.
Está pasando una que te entre la otra.
Okay. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Chaim.
So, while counting the Jewish people, the Torah lists the different families of the Jewish people in this week's Torah portion. In chapter 26, verse 9, it says, the sons, it's speaking about the family of tribe of Reuven, the sons of Eliav were Nemuel, Dasan, and Aviram. Who are these Dasan and Aviram? So they are Kruei Ha'eda, they are the chosen of the congregation. They are the ones who incited the nation of Israel against Moshe Rabbeinu, and they in the assembly of Korach, where they incited the Jewish people against God. Now, the end of the verse, sounds like what we're used to hearing about them. But what is the beginning of the verse? Dasan and Aviram are the chosen of the congregation. Is that a title we want to give them? That's not. I mean, even if they were, is that what we need? First of all, what does it mean they're chosen of the congregation? Second of all, is that what we want to know about them? Really?
Fast forward a little bit.
Yeah, if they weren't, it doesn't sound like something we should be talking about. So, this Sunday, of course, we fasted. The Sunday, the fast was actually on Shabbos, but of course, was the 17th of Tammuz, and we fast for 5 different events that occurred in Jewish history. Of course, the tablets were broken, the Romans surrounded the walls of Yerushalayim, the Torah scroll was burnt, the idol was placed in the Beis Hamikdash, the Heichal, and the daily sacrifice was stopped. Now, when exactly did this happen? There are different opinions about exactly when it happened. But according to one opinion, it happened during the Hashmonayic dynasty. The famous king Alexander Yanai, when he passed away, from the family of the Hashmonaim, when he passed away, his wife took over for a period of time, and then it passed on to their children. So Alexander Yanai had 2 sons. Alexander Yanai and his wife Shleimis had 2 sons, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. Those were their names. Now Hyrcanus was the older son, but he wasn't a very strong leader, and he wasn't sure if he would be able to become the king. No, that was a different Hyrcanus.
We don't hear this name nowadays, but it was common back then.
Yes, Hyrcanus is a pretty common name. So Hyrcanus was not a very strong, leader. He didn't have leadership qualities, and he felt he wouldn't make the best king. So he had a discussion with his brother, and they decided that he would be the Kohen Gadol, he would be the high priest, because if you remember the Hashmonaim, they were both priests and kings. So Hyrcanus, the older brother, would become the high priest, and Aristobulus, his younger brother, would become the king. And that's what happened. And everything seemed to be going fine until Hyrcanus befriended an Edomite convert by the name of Antipater. Antipater, I don't know how you pronounce it, who started telling him, you were cheated over here, you were supposed to be the king, and your younger brother took it away from you, you got to take back what's rightfully yours. How do I do that? Yeah, you could raise an army and you can fight against your brother. Is it really worth it? Fighting a war, of course, you got to stand up for yourself, you got to get up and fight. And so Hyrcanus went out, and he raised an army, and he went to Egypt, he raised a big army, and he marched on Yerushalayim. Of course, his brother Aristobulus closed the gates, and Hyrcanus surrounded the city, laid a siege to the city. And slowly the food inside the city began to run out, but the people were still strong, and there were no more animals inside the city. So the people in the city sent a message to the Jews outside, we have a problem. We have to bring a daily sacrifice every morning and every afternoon, a carbon tamid, and we have no sheep in the city. We'll pay you a good deal of money, and if you can send in some sheep for the sacrifice. Hyrcanus, of course, was the Kohen Gadol we're talking about, right? Of course, we're at war with you, but we both recognize the importance of the sacrifice. If you lower down a basket of money, we're going to send you up a sheep. And that's what they did. Twice a day they would send up 2 lambs up into the city. And the siege is dragging on, and the people in the city are holding strong. And Hyrcanus holds a big council. He brings all of his advisors. What are we going to do? We can't break down the walls of the city. It's too tough for us. And what could we do? How could we get in? So one of his advisors, who was, the Gemara says, was very well versed in Greek culture, he stood up and he spoke in Greek. And he said, as long as those people are going to continue bringing the daily sacrifice, we'll never be able to conquer them. The only way to succeed is by stopping them, preventing them from bringing the daily sacrifice. So the next morning, they lower down the basket of money, waiting for the lambs to come in, and they take a pig, and they put a pig in the basket. And the people on top of the wall can't really see what's in the basket. So they begin raising up the basket, and as it's halfway up the wall, the pig sinks its hooves into the wall, and the whole wall shook, and there was a loud noise that was heard for many miles around. And at that point, the rabbis, when they saw what's happening, they made a decree. They made 2 decrees. They said that, first of all, no more pig farming in the land of Israel. Can't be done anymore. And second of all, no Jews are allowed to study Greek. Strange decree, no? Right? So now the Tamid sacrifice is stopped. It's the 17th of Tammuz, and both sides realize that the war has now gotten really serious. And they both realize that it's not really going anywhere, so they both send ambassadors to Rome to ask for Rome to help them. And Rome was only too happy to intervene, right? And the Roman legions marched on Eretz Yisrael, and unfortunately they never left until they, many years later, destroyed Yerushalayim. So this is one of the 5 tragic events that took place in the 17th of Tammuz. And of course, when reading the story, 2 questions pop up. First of all, what does this Greek advisor have to get up and say Greek? Tell the Kohen Gadol that you know that the sacrifice is protecting the city. The Kohen Gadol didn't know that himself, right? I mean, this was his job, right? His job was to bring the sacrifice. What does he need this Greek advisor to tell him? And why did the sages come along and say, oh, okay, no more Greek, because it was a Greek advisor who spoke in Greek, no more Greek. What does Greek have to do with it? What do the Greeks have to do with this? The Greeks don't seem to have any, maybe the Romans might be somehow related to the story, but where do the Greeks come in?
The Greek advisor.
Okay, but his advice had nothing to do with his Greek, with Greece, or with his Greek cultural knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
He could have spoken in Hebrew. He could have spoken in Latin. I don't know. He could have spoken in any language. What difference would it have made, right? So, the Yanaver Rav, the rabbi of the town of Yanav, was a very well-respected rabbi. He was very knowledgeable in Torah, and he earned the respect of his townspeople, but he was known to be a little bit stubborn. He was known for his stubbornness. Now, it came time for him to marry off his son, and they had to go to the next city for the wedding, and they had a whole caravan traveling through the woods. They came to the wedding, they start coming back, and the way back, they're traveling through the woods, and they realize it's starting to get dark, and they have to daven. So they stop off in the middle of the forest, and they start davening. And then everybody gets back on the wagon, and some of the wagons start going, and other wagons are getting ready to go, and they're like, hey, where's the rabbi? The rabbi's not here. Well, he must have gone in one of the front wagons. He wasn't this wagon, but he's not here anymore. He must have gone with the other wagons, and they continue on their journey, and they get home, and they're looking for the rabbi, and the rabbi's not there. All right? So they send back a search party, and they start looking through the woods, and they're looking for him for days, and no one's able to find him. The rabbi's got lost. He's wandering around on his own. Somehow he survives. He finds things to eat and drink in the forest. And a couple of weeks go by, and Hashem helps, and he's able to find his way back to civilization. He comes home, and the whole town hears the rabbi came back. They come out to welcome him. They start so excited. They ask him what happened. He tells over the whole story, how he was protected, how he heard the wild animals, but he was Baruch Hashem, nothing happened to him, how he managed to find food whenever he needed the food, and they're all so happy, they're celebrating. And then the rabbi turns to them, he says, no, it's good, I made it back just in time for Shabbos. Let's go get ready for Shabbos. And they're like, no, you're making a mistake. Today's Thursday. And he says, no, it's not Thursday, it's Friday. And they say, listen, when you're lost in the woods, I guess you kind of lost track of time. But today's Thursday. And he goes, absolutely not, it's Friday. And he said, no, you're making a mistake. You're like, me? You're making a mistake. How did you miscalculate? And they're like, no, listen, we can bring everybody here. We're hundreds of people in this town. We know what day it is. And he's like, no, you're all wrong. You're all wrong. Tonight is Shabbos. And he goes out, he goes to the mikveh, he gets dressed up in his Shabbos clothing, he comes to shul at night, and the chazan starts davening, he starts screaming at the chazan, you're davening the wrong davening. He gets up, and he starts davening Shabbos davening. Right? The next morning, he comes to shul in his Shabbos clothing, Friday morning, and everybody's putting on tefillin, he starts screaming, yelling at people, don't put on tefillin, it's Shabbos. Right? And and his family, he starts yelling at his wife, why didn't prepare the Shabbos meal? She's like, we have some food, right? Finally that night, everybody's getting ready for Shabbos, and he comes into shul, and he's like, it's Sunday, what are you doing? It's Motzei Shabbos, you gotta daven a normal Ma'ariv. He gets up, he davens a weekday Ma'ariv, and everyone's trying to speak to him. Nothing works. Right? So they figure after Shabbos, they're going to call in some rabbis from the nearby communities. Maybe they can talk some sense into him. They bring in some of the surrounding rabbis who come to meet with him, and they tell him, listen, you're in the woods for a long time, and obviously you kind of lost track of your days. And he says, absolutely not. You're the ones who are making a mistake. I have the correct date. Right? Happens, right? There are such people, right? Anybody know such people? Right? I know such people. What?
Usually kids.
I know such kids, right?
You know teachers.
Everyone else is wrong. I'm right, everyone else is wrong.
Do they have a cell phone?
Cell phone is wrong, right? The computers are wrong. The radio is wrong. Everybody's wrong. I calculated, I have the right calculation. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? They start sending around messages trying to figure out who can help. And finally they reach out to the famous Rebbe of Shmelka of Nikolsburg, who in his youth was a friend of the Yan of Rav. They tell him, you got to come help your friend out. There's a big problem over here. So he comes over. He comes into the city, and he says the Yan of Rav rushes out to greet him, his old friend from his youth. No, right? He says, listen, you got to stay here for Shabbos. And Shmuel's like, of course. He's like, Shabbos is tomorrow. Is tomorrow night. He said, of course, Shabbos is tomorrow night. He said, everybody in my town, when I was gone, they somehow miscalculated the dates, and they think they think tomorrow is Thursday. And Shmuel's like, what? They think it's, don't worry, I'll take care of it, I'll talk to them. Right? So, he goes out, he tells everybody in the community, tonight we're all going to get ready for Shabbos, we're all going to dress in our Shabbos clothes. And they're like, what, you got you too? He's like, no, we have a plan. He tells them all his plan, and they're all going to get ready for Shabbos on Thursday night, right? They all go Thursday afternoon, everybody goes to the mikveh, and the rabbi's so happy. Wow, my good friend Reb Shmelka finally convinced everyone. He finally got it right. They didn't trust me, but at least they trust this Hasidic Rebbe, right? So, anyways, they come to shul Thursday night, and Reb Shmelka honors the Yan of Rav to daven, and he himself and everybody in the community got daven quietly weekday Shemon Esrei, and the Rav davens a Shabbos Shemon Esrei. And they come back home. The Shabbos meal is all set up before them, and they begin celebrating. And not just the Rav's family is there, but everybody in town came to celebrate. And the Rav gets up. He lifts up a glass of wine. He says, "L'chaim, I'm so happy. Everyone in this town finally came to their senses. If Shmelka talked some sense into you guys." And Shmelka says, you're right, Rabbi. This calls for a great celebration. Got to bring out some more wine, right? So they bring out some more wine. Shmelka says, I have this special bottle I brought, specially for you, Rabbi, special l'chaim. We have to thank Hashem for for rescuing you from your being lost in the woods, and for together we were able to talk some sense into this foolish town and correct their terrible mistake. in this merit, we got to drink this really old, strong wine that I brought for you. And he honors him with a big cup. They bring up a big cup. He drinks one cup. We got to drink another cup, a third cup. Finally, the rabbi falls down. It's sleeping on the table. Rav Shmelka brings a nice pillow. They put him down, a nice place to rest. And Rav Shmelka tells everybody to go home quietly and to come back the next night. Right? This rabbi had, I don't know how the wine was spiked, but he slept for 24 hours straight. The next night, everybody comes back, dressed in their Shabbos clothes again, and Reb Shmelka shakes the Anavarov awake, and he's like, yeah, it's time for bench, let's get up. And they bench, and everybody goes home on Shabbos, right? So, when you're talking to somebody, and the other person is wrong when you're in an argument with somebody, there are usually two ways to approach it. One way is that I'm right, and I'm going to convince you that you're wrong, and I'm going to show you how wrong you are, right? And sometimes there might be benefit in that, but usually it doesn't really help either side, right? Sometimes it's better to lose the argument and to bring greater, to bring greater benefit for everybody involved. Right, in 1963, Professor Velvel Green.
Oh, this guy's so much here.
Oh, yeah.
The whole year, Yankee Green.
Oh, okay.
I don't even know it because you came after him.
So, Professor Velvel Green was from the University of Minnesota. He was involved in the field of bacteriology. He was invited by NASA to join the space program. They were supposed to study the possible effects of space travel on different life forms. And if he was very well known, he was asked to lecture in many different places. And he came into contact with Rav Moshe Feller, the Rebbe Shliach in Minneapolis, who began, inviting him over for Shabbos. And he was, from a very traditional family, but they weren't really practicing. But he started to become involved. He kind of came to come to shul for Shabbos. They started even bringing some kosher into his house. What?
I think I know which story you're going to share.
And of course, and Moshe Feller even brought him to speak to the Rebbe. He wrote letters, corresponded with the Rebbe a little bit. And one day, during one of the classes, Rav Moshe Feller is discussing the creation of the world. And Professor Green is like, come on, Rabbi, you don't believe that 6-day creation story, right? We're, in the olden days, they didn't really know better, so they came up with this old, outdated, archaic story. But today we know how it works. We know they have the theory of evolution. And Rabbi Feller tries to speak to him, but he says, listen, I'm not really a scientist. This is not my field. But we have a letter from the Rebbe on the subject, where the Rebbe goes through the theory of evolution and how it works out with Torah. And he said, I would like to see the letter. So Moshe gets him the letter, and he goes through the letter, and he's not really convinced, right? And he says to Rabbi Moshe, listen, this is interesting points, but very unscientific. I have so many problems with this. There's so many issues I have with every one of the arguments made. I have so many questions on it. And he starts asking his questions, and Rav says, listen, this is not something I'm going to answer. If you have a problem with the letter, you can write to the Rebbe, right? So he sits down and he writes a letter to the Rebbe. And he goes through all of the Rebbe's arguments and all of his questions on the arguments. And he says, listen, and he concludes his letter. He says, listen, Rebbe, when it comes to Torah knowledge, you're the greatest authority in the world. I'm all due respect, I'm not going to argue with you in your Torah knowledge. But you got to learn to stay in your lane. When it comes to scientific knowledge, you got to leave that to the scientists. And don't get involved in scientific debates. That's how he concluded his letter. Right? He sent his letter to the Rebbe, and he's waiting for an answer. A while later, he gets a letter back from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asks him how things are going with his Shabbos, with his kashrus, with other things, but there's not a word mentioned about the whole theory of evolution, about the creation of the world. No mention of anything, of any of the questions. He thinks to himself, it seems like the Rebbe learned his lesson, right? He's sticking to his lane, right? He's asking me about Torah and mitzvahs. He's not getting involved in evolution. Okay, great. Right? He continues his journey over the next few years. He continues writing to the Rebbe. He writes to the Rebbe how his whole home is now kosher, how he's now Shomer Shabbos. And many years go by, and eventually he writes to the Rebbe that he's sending his children to yeshiva. Right? And the Rebbe writes back that he's very excited to hear this. And by the way, regarding the letter that you wrote me a few years ago, these are answers to all of your questions. Right? The Rebbe goes on to answer all the questions. And then he writes on the bottom like this. He says, you're probably wondering why I waited this long to respond to your letter. So I want you to know that my job as Rebbe is not to win arguments. My job is to bring Jews closer to Yiddishkeit. That's my job. Right? And the best way for me to do my job is sometimes by not answering and not winning an argument. So human nature, right, is when we're involved in an argument, in a fight, we want to win. And we sometimes don't think about the costs involved in winning. And very often, the benefits of winning, the costs of winning far outweigh the benefits, right? Another similar story told about a rabbi in New England, about 60 years ago, who, he he had a shul over there, and he had a lot of problems with other rabbis in the area, non-Orthodox rabbis. And there was a lot of machlokes, a lot of politics. And so he went to consult with the Rebbe. And he said, there's a lot of machlokes, and I don't know what to do, I don't know how to handle it. There's a few different rabbis, and there are a lot of arguments. So the Rebbe answered him with a story. The Rebbe said that in the 18th century, the big Talmud Chacham, Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, was very well respected by the king of Prague, right? By the king of Bohemia, whatever the empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, I guess, whatever it was part of. And some of the king's other advisors were a little bit jealous of this respect that he got. They were always going to the king, telling him how the Jew doesn't really know what he's talking about, and how he's not really very knowledgeable. And one of the popular pastimes of the royal court in those days was chicken fights. I don't know how popular it is today, but that was a very all the king's ministers and advisors got involved in it. They had these specially trained chickens that they would have to race against each other, and they would attack each other on the way and try to knock each other out of the race. Right?
Back home is actually a coliseum for chicken fights.
So one of the the only member of the royal court, the only member of the royal court that didn't join in these chicken fights was Rabbi Yonasan. And one day the advisors came to the king like, it's not right. Your Jewish advisor, he claims to be so knowledgeable and so smart. Why doesn't he, compete with us? Let's see how well he does.
His chickens aren't that smart.
Right? So the king calls Rabbi Yonasan. He's like, listen, if you want to be part of the high society, you got to get involved in our chicken fight. And he's like, listen, I'm not really interested. The king says, at least once, you got to join. So, look, I'll do it once, we'll figure it out. He goes to the market, he looks at some chickens, he finds this old, skinny little chicken over there, and he brings it to the next fight, and the race begins, and all the big, strong chickens start running and attacking each other and fighting. And Yonasan's chicken's like cowering in the corner over there, and he sees this big, massive chickens jumping on top of each other, and he doesn't want to get involved, so he walks around the whole fight, and he gets to the other side, and he wins the race, right? So the Rebbe says to this rabbi in New England, sometimes the best way to win the race is to walk around the whole machlokes, to avoid the whole thing.
Absolutely.
I like that.
Right? That was his answer. And this is something which is very hard to realize when you're involved in an argument, right? When you're involved in a fight, when you're involved in a machlokes. Human nature is that we'll do anything it takes to win, to come out on top, even if it destroys ourselves, if it destroys our families, if it destroys our friendships. The Chafetz Chaim used to tell a story about a city near Radin where there was two leaders of the community got into a very, very big machlokes, and the whole town was shaken up. Many people tried to come in and break it up, but nothing really worked. After a while, things kept on getting worse, and the children of these two leaders of the machlokes became very, very sick, and within a short time, they both died. And when the Chafetz Chaim, the oldest, each one had their oldest son became sick and they died. And the Chafetz Chaim, when he heard about this, he immediately traveled to the next town and he met with one of these people who was one of the leaders of the argument. And he says to him, it's gone far enough, right? Don't you see the effect that it's had? Don't you see what it's doing to your children? He says, think about your children, right? This is killing your children. We know that this is one of the things that even affects even children under bar mitzvah. Like Kairach, it destroyed his whole family. So this man turned to the Chafetz Chaim and he said, I don't care if I have to bury all my children. I will win this fight. And Chafetz Chaim would say over the story later. This is really what's going on. Getting back to Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. This was what was happening over here. Our question was, why did Hyrcanus need this Greek advisor to tell him that the Karban Tamid was protecting Yerushalayim? Hyrcanus knew that he was the Kohen Gadol. And the answer is, of course, Hyrcanus knew that the Karban Tamid was protecting the Jews in Yerushalayim. But it wasn't just protecting the Jews in Yerushalayim, it was protecting the entire Jewish nation. And Hyrcanus had a little bit of sense in his head, and he said, of course I could stop the Karban Tamid, and yes, Yerushalayim will fall, and I'm going to conquer my enemy, but what will happen to me? What will happen to my people? The Romans will come in and they'll destroy both of us. Right? He had a little bit of seichel in his head. And this is where his Greek advisor came in. Right? In Greek culture, what was the most important thing? Look at that time, at Spartan culture. Right? The most important thing was military victory. Coming out on top. Not because you want to gain something out of the victory, but for the glory and honor of victory itself. They say that children who were born and were evaluated as children who would not make good soldiers, they were left to die. Because they didn't match what the criteria of being a good member of Greek society. Right? So in Greek society, the approach was that it doesn't matter what happens to us. The important thing is that we end up on top. It doesn't matter if we destroy ourselves, if we destroy our children, if we destroy our families, if we destroy our nation, if we destroy our community. And this is why the Gemara says that this advisor got up and he spoke in Greek. What does that mean, he spoke in Greek? Who cares what language he spoke? It means he spoke the way the Greeks speak. And he came over to Hyrcanus and he says, who cares what damage it's going to cause? Who cares what the Romans are going to do in 100 years from now? How they're going to destroy our nation, how they're going to exile the entire nation. You have to destroy your brother. You have to destroy your brother who's inside the city. And if what it takes to destroy your brother is stopping the Karban Tamid, then you, the Kohen Gadol, are going to stop the Karban Tamid. And that's what he did. That's what he did. Yes, what's your question?
So why did
the Edomite person started the fight, but even he didn't come up with this idea of stopping the Karban Tamid, right? The Edomite convert, Antipater, he wasn't a good guy, but even he didn't come up with this idea, right? And this is what it took. And that's why the Chacham came along and they banned the study of Greek. Because this was the approach, this was the culture, this was the attitude that destroyed the Greek philosophy that destroyed us.
Ultimately,
Going back,
destroy them, annihilate them.
Yes.
Like all the big, glorious, big societies, all they can speak about right now is the ruins.
That's right. Yes. Destroys everybody involved. Destroys everybody involved. And it's hard. Sometimes we have to say, listen, there's a big machlokes going on. The best way to overcome it is just, They say the story is told that Rabbi Akiva Eger once traveled to the city of Nikolsburg, where the rabbi at that time was a Mordechai Bennett. And Rabbi Akiva Eger got up, they asked him to speak on Shabbos, so he got up and he gave a big drasha, started giving a big drasha on a difficult Rambam. And he started giving this whole deep explanation. And in the middle, the rabbi of the city, Mordechai, got up and he said, listen, there's a problem with the way you're learning the Rambam. There's another Rambam somewhere else that learns differently. So Rabbi Yeager stopped his speech in the middle. He says, it's a good question. And he walked down from the podium and he sat down in his seat. Everyone's a little surprised. After davening, after everybody leaves, whatever, Mordechai goes over to Akiva and he's like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to ruin your speech. I just had a question. I didn't mean to ruin your whole speech. And Akiva says, no, don't worry about this. I can answer all of your questions. I just didn't want to do it in front of, during the speech, in front of everybody else, because you're the rabbi of this community. And they need to respect me. I'm passing through. It doesn't, whether they respect me or not is not important. Right? And he answered all of his questions. Right? And this really is what's going on, going back to the beginning of Moshe and Dasan and Aviram. The Torah tells us Dasan and Aviram were Kruei Ha'eda. They were chosen leaders of the congregation. And they were the ones who were destroyed when they fought against Moshe and against Hashem. What is it telling us? This Dasan and Aviram, when they fought against Moshe, that wasn't the first time. They fought against Moshe many, many times. All the way back in Egypt, they caused problems for Moshe. During the Mun, they caused problems. All the time, they're causing problems. Why didn't Moshe get rid of them earlier? So it tells us the pasuk that they were created. They were leaders of the generation. And Moshe knew. Moshe said, they're terrible people. They're making my life miserable. But starting, I don't want to start a fight with them. I don't want to make a machloikas. Right? I don't need to win. And Moshe did everything he could to push off this machlekes. Unfortunately, once Korach came along and started his argument, Dasan and Aviram also joined in, and at that point, they had to be destroyed. But until that point, where there was a big public argument, a big public machlekes, Moshe said, I'm willing to forgo on my own honor in order to avoid this public argument and this public debate. And this is Chaim, we all have to realize in our own lives. There are times when we have arguments with our spouses, with our children, with our friends, within our community. And we have to realize that sometimes the cost of winning is destroying our families, destroying our marriage, destroying our friendships, destroying our children. We have to realize that sometimes the cost of winning far outweigh the benefits, and we have to be willing to lose the argument and to bring all the blessings and joy and happiness and peace into our lives.
I find I'm sharing this story with my wife.